Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is. And what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away. The systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the capital relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. President Snow can poison rivals, rig arenas, and break victors, but there's one tribute whose leash he never fully held. Finnick Odair. At face value, Finnick is the capital's favourite success story. He wins the games at 14, walks out of the arena a beautiful weapon, and steps straight into a life of sugar cubes, adoring crowds, and whispered invitations from the richest people in Panem. You see him on screen, half smile, bronze skin, casually draped in a fishing net, and you think, that's a victor who learned to play along. But here's the real question. How does that same golden boy end up helping to destroy Snow's regime from the inside? If Snow can turn trauma into obedience, if he can make Haymitch drink, make Johanna furious, make Katniss terrified for her sister, why doesn't the same system keep Finnick safely on a leash? Why does the poster child for capital excess become one of the rebellion's sharpest weapons? There is a lot to uncover here, because Snow's entire power structure is built on the promise that once you win, the games never really let you go. Any victor will tell you that. The arena follows you home. Snow's method is simple on paper. You survive the games, you get a house, you get distance from your district, and then you get tied back to the capital through fear, addiction, and spectacle. He owns your body, your image, your future. Finnick is forced into that system harder than almost anyone, paraded as a sex symbol, sold to capital elites, paid not in money, but in secrets. On the surface, he's compliant. In reality, he's collecting the very information that will later tear Snow's reputation apart. And this is where we talk about control. Because Finnick's most important props are not the sugar cubes or the fancy robes. It's his trident. It's that coil of rope he's always working through his fingers. Knot after knot after knot. At face value, it's just a District 4 habit, a fisherman's tick. But that part matters because those objects are the only things in the arena he truly owns. The trident turns him from spectacle into threat. The rope turns waiting into preparation, panic into pattern, helplessness into something he can literally hold. So here's the contradiction. Snow's system is supposed to own victors completely. Their houses, their schedules, their bodies, their relationships. The capital builds an entire world where a victor's only safe move is obedience. Yet somehow, out of that same machine, you get Finnick Odair, a rebel operative who walks back into the arena carrying Snow's darkest secrets in his head and a weapon the capital paid for in his hand. So, what went wrong? Why did the structure designed to break him actually create the one victor Snow never truly controlled. That's what we're going to cover as we trace Finnick's journey from capital trophy to the quiet center of a plan to bring Snow down. Why one pretty boy threatened an empire. To answer that, we have to zoom out from Finnick's dim capital hotel rooms to the entire map of Panem. Because Finnick isn't just one tragic story. He's a stress test for the system. At face value, the Hunger Games are about killing children on television. But here's the real question. Why does Snow care so much about what happens after the cannon fires for the last time? Why pour money into Victor's village, stylists, sponsorships, and media tours instead of just dumping the winner back in their district and letting the trauma do the rest? Back then, in the early games, that's basically what they did. You won, you went home, you drank yourself to death, or disappeared into some broken corner of your district. The capital got its spectacle, but the story ended there. No ongoing relationship, no second act. So why the change? Snow realizes fear alone has a limit. If the games only produce corpses and shattered adults, you get terror, but you don't get aspiration. You don't get children volunteering. You don't get districts quietly policing themselves because they're chasing a promise. Victor's village, the mentoring system, the celebrity interviews, all of that matters because it turns one surviving tribute into a permanent billboard for the regime. This is where we talk about the second, quieter arena. Winning doesn't end the games. It upgrades them. You move from the bloodbath at the cornucopia to a world of forced prostitution, blackmail, addiction, and surveillance. You're paid in status and in secrets. You mentor, you perform your talents, you answer the capital's phone calls at any hour. You are never off stage. So why keep victors alive but leashed? Why not just execute the difficult ones? The reason is simple and brutal. A living victor is more useful than a dead rebel. They sell hope to their district, they normalize the games, and they stand as proof that the system can reward obedience. Killing them too openly breaks the illusion that the promise is real. And then there's Finnick. Finnick is the apex of this evolution, the perfect commodity, beautiful, charming, lethal in the arena, and endlessly marketable afterward. Snow turns him into a capital sex symbol, a weaponized fantasy. On paper, this should be Snow's greatest success story. If the methods work on anyone, they should work on him. But here's the real question. What happens when your most valuable product starts collecting information? When the people paying for him don't just hand over money, they hand over their secrets. Finnick's clients confess affairs, crimes, even Snow's own poison games. Every night, the capital thinks it's consuming him. In reality, he's quietly building an arsenal. That part matters because it exposes the flaw in Snow's design. The same system that keeps victors alive to sell hope also keeps them alive long enough to see behind the curtain. Most break, a few drink. Finnick remembers. So when he finally turns, you don't just have a traumatized victor, you have an internal threat who knows the names, the methods, the rot at the core of the presidency. The capital thought they'd scripted his whole life. Instead, they'd trained the one tribute who could help burn the script down. And the moment Finnick stops playing along, is where everything starts to crack. Our angle, Finnick as Snow's system glitch, and the moment Finnick stops playing along is where everything starts to crack. Because here's the real question. Finnick O'Dare is the capital's golden boy, the poster child for the system works. So how does that victor become the one tribute Snow never fully controls? Our core claim is this. Finnick isn't just a tragic side character who dies nobly in the tunnels. He is the ultimate product of Snow's control machine who turns into its fatal flaw. The very tools the capital uses to own him, sex, secrets, spectacle, end up giving Finnick the power to help destroy the presidency built on them. That part matters because it reframes him from eye candy to structural threat. At face value, Snow's architecture of control is simple. You keep the districts poor, so they'll gamble their children for food. You keep them terrified, so they'll obey. You dangle hope, victor status, a big house, a train to the capital, so they'll participate willingly in the games. Fear, hope, addiction, poverty, spectacle. We're going to cover all of those, but Finnick is our case study in how that system can glitch from the inside. Snow gives Finnick the full treatment. He wins at 14, becomes a living promise to every fishing district kid that beauty and skill can buy you out of starvation. He's showered with wealth, safety, adoration. On paper, it's perfect. But here's the twist. The payment for his services isn't just money. Capital elites pay in secrets, names, affairs, poisons. Suddenly the boy they thought they owned is sitting on an information network Snow can't fully see. So the promise is luxury, the reality is sexual exploitation, blackmail, and constant threat against Annie and Mags. Yet Finnick quietly flips those same conditions into leverage. Every night he's forced to perform, he's also collecting data. Every whispered confession turns the relationship between victor and client one click closer to blackmail in the other direction. There is a lot to uncover here because it shows how a body turned into a weapon by the capital can become a weapon against it. This is where we talk about Finnick as more than a charming mentor in Catching Fire. By the time he's throwing that trident in the quarter quell, he's already a rebel operative, already connected to Beatty, Johanna, Plutarch. He walks back into the arena, not just as a career tribute, but as someone holding the capital's darkest habits in his hands. How do you scare a man who knows you poison your rivals and mask the blood with roses? And then there's the broadcast in Mockingjay. Finnick sits in front of a camera and calmly narrates Snow's poisonings, his use of victors as sex slaves, his blackmail web stretching from the capital to every district. That's the moment fear-based power hits its limit. You can't unring that bell. Even when Finnick dies, the secrets don't. Love, his for Annie, for Mags, for his people, turns out to be the one thing Snow can't corrupt, and it's what lets Finnick turn spectacle into truth-telling. So if Finnick is the system glitch, how exactly did Snow's design produce him in the first place? And why did no one in the capital see the error code blinking? What we're unpacking about Finnick and Snow. So to answer that blinking error code, we need a roadmap, because Finnick doesn't just appear in Mockingjay, fully formed as Snow's worst PR nightmare. He's a product of the system, and then he's the flaw that system can't patch. First, we're going to cover his origin story. This is where we talk about 14-year-old Finnick Odair walking into the arena as a career tribute and walking out as the capital's favourite weapon. Why does a child become a legend overnight? We'll trace how his victory at 14, the trident, the nets, the sponsors, all get spun into a narrative the capital can sell back to the districts as hope. At face value, he's rewarded with wealth, status, and that glittering public relationship with the capital. But here's the real question. What does Snow build into that reward so it doubles as a leash? That part matters because his post-games life, Victor's village, constant media work, and then the sexual exploitation Suzanne Collins confirmed are all designed as ongoing games he can never actually win. Then we move into the middle section, Snow's control toolkit. Fear, addiction, poverty, spectacle. We'll break down how those tactics normally work on victors in general. Haymitch's alcoholism, Enobaria's teeth, the way mentoring keeps you chained to the arena forever, and then zoom in on how they're aimed specifically at Finnick. Why does Snow use sex instead of morphling on him? Why pay him in secrets instead of money? There is a lot to uncover here because those choices accidentally give Finnick something most victors never get: leverage. We'll ask why those tools never fully take, and how a boy meant to be a pretty prop becomes an information broker who knows what Snow's roses are really hiding. From there, we'll widen the lens and start comparing case studies. How does Finnick's trajectory stack up against Haymitch, drowning in trauma? Joanna, stripped of everyone she loves. Annie, protected but fragile. We'll look at how he quietly builds a support network. Mags in District 4, Beatty in 3, Johanna in 7, Plutarch in the capital, and turns forced intimacy with capital elites into an underground information empire. Why does this one Victor end up with threads connecting half the rebellion's leadership, all while Snow believes he owns him? After that, we'll slow down for a book versus movie segment. This is where we talk about what the films only imply: the prostitution, the depth of his bitterness, the full weight of that Mockingjay broadcast. We'll ask how adaptation choices soften or amplify his subversive role, and why losing explicit details of his exploitation changes our sense of his relationship with Snow's regime. And finally, we'll end on a speculative question: was Finnick actually more dangerous to Snow than Katniss? We'll explore an alternate Panem where Snow never turns him into a sexual commodity. No secrets, no blackmail, no leverage, and ask whether the rebellion still happens the same way. By the end, you'll know exactly why one tribute Snow tried hardest to own may have been the one he could never really control. Welcome to the arena behind the arena. So when you zoom out from Finnick's hypothetical what if Snow never owned him, you actually land in the exact space this channel lives in. We're always asking, what happens to Panem's power structures when one tribute doesn't play by the rules of the games? If you're new here and you enjoy pulling apart the wiring behind the arena, the law, the politics, the psychology of every victor and every district, you're in the right place. On this channel, we're going to cover how Snow builds systems of control, not just moments of cruelty. Why Victor's village exists, why tesserae exists, why a single train ride or a single rose can reshape an entire relationship between the capital and the districts. At face value, Finnick's story is a personal tragedy, a beautiful victor turned into a capital sex symbol. But here's the real question. Why does that specific form of exploitation become such a threat to Snow's regime? This is where we talk about the mechanics of control, the secrets Finnick collects, the way he moves through elite capital parties, the quiet network he builds with Mags, Annie, Beatty, and even Johanna. That part matters because it turns a single traumatized victor into a long-term structural problem. There is a lot to uncover here. Finnick sits at the intersection of character drama, world building, and political analysis. He's a weaponized promise. The capital tells the districts, win and you can be adored, rich, safe. Then it shows them Finnick O'Dare, the golden boy. But under the surface he knows about Snow's poisons, about the blood behind the roses, about the way other victors are trafficked instead of rewarded. Once you see that, the games stop being entertainment and start being evidence. Quick pause, because if this is the kind of thing you want more of, breaking down how Beatty's tech slips through Snow's fingers, or why Johanna's open defiance is so hard to contain, you might want to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We move through Panem one control system at a time, and the next few videos are all about the uncontrollable elements Snow thought he had locked down. Pattern interrupt for your brain. Finnick isn't just another tragic backstory. He's a diagnostic tool for Snow's entire strategy. If Snow can't fully own the tribute he's parading as proof of the capital's generosity, what does that say about the stability of the promise he's selling to every district child watching the screen? So from here on, we're pulling back the curtain on the arena behind Finnick's arena. Not just how he wins, but how Snow thinks he's winning through him, and why that illusion quietly starts to crack long before the rebellion ever reaches the capital's front door. From 14-year-old Victor to capital property. So to really see how that illusion starts to crack, we have to drop a pin in the timeline. Finnick's story doesn't happen in the wild, chaotic early days of the games. Those first arenas were blunt instruments, mass graves with cameras. By the time we reach the 65th Hunger Games, we're deep into Snow's polished spectacle era. The capital has victors' villages, stylists, sponsors, carefully curated narratives. At face value, the system is running smoothly, so why is a 14-year-old about to become its biggest liability? This is where we talk about Finnick's actual win. District 4, a career district that already treats the games as a profession. Finnick enters the arena absurdly young, but he's been trained for this since childhood. He's lethal with a trident, comfortable in water, and crucially, he understands performance. He doesn't just kill, he charms. He flirts with the cameras. He turns survival into a show. That part matters, because the capital audience doesn't just watch him win, they fall in love with him doing it. You can almost feel the shift in the control room. They don't just have a victor, they have a brand. Most victors get a crown, a check, and a quiet slide into trauma. Finnick gets something different. The capital reacts to him the way a studio reacts to a breakout star. He's young, beautiful, charismatic, and from a district already associated with romance and allure. The reason he becomes the capital's golden boy is simple. He sells, ratings spike, merchandising potential explodes. Why waste that on one victory tour when you can turn him into a permanent fantasy? But here's the real question. What does the capital actually do with someone that marketable? Suzanne Collins answers it bluntly, outside the text. Finnick is forced into sexual exploitation by capital elites. They don't even pay him in money, they pay in secrets. His body becomes currency. His mind becomes a vault. Every night, with a powerful patron, is another confession, another whispered scandal, another detail about how Snow poisons rivals and hides the blood with roses. On screen, you see a flirtatious celebrity. Off screen, you're watching the construction of the most dangerous information network in Panem. And yet, on paper, Finnick looks like the perfect success story of Snow's system. He's rich. He has a mansion in Victor's village. He's adored in the capital, respected in his district, protected from future reapings. The promise appears fulfilled. Win the games, escape poverty, live in luxury. So why does it feel so off when you really think about his freedom? Because none of that wealth belongs to him in any meaningful way. His time, his body, his relationships are scheduled and surveilled. He's property being rented out to the highest bidder. Snow thinks he's created the ultimate advertisement for hope. Instead, he's quietly breeding the one victor who understands exactly how the capital's elite sin, cheat, and bleed. There is a lot to uncover here, because that double life is what will eventually turn Finnick from product into weapon. The real twist is when he stops keeping those secrets for the capital and starts saving them for the day he decides to talk. And when he finally does, that's when Victor's village stops being a prize and becomes the crime scene. Snow's favorite weapon, pretty Victors on invisible leashes. Victor's village is the crime scene. Finnick O'Dare is the evidence. Because once you understand what Snow did to Finnick, you see the real blueprint behind all those pretty houses and televised smiles. Victors aren't just survivors. They're walking advertisements. At face value, they sell you the games as terror. But here's the real question. Why does the capital need them to sell the games as a dream at the exact same time? Think about the relationship the capital wants you to have with victory. It can't just be win or die. It has to be win and you get everything. Wealth, safety, status, and in Finnick's case, access to the most decadent corners of capital excess. If the districts believe that's possible, then volunteering makes sense, career training makes sense, and the promise of becoming a victor starts to outweigh the fear of the arena. This is where we talk about Snow's favorite weapon, the beautiful victor on an invisible leash. Finnick becomes the prototype. Crowned at 14, he's paraded through capital parties, draped in nets that turn his trauma into fashion, offered sugar cubes as if the games were a flirty anecdote instead of state-sanctioned murder. He isn't just a champion from District 4, he's the capital's fantasy of what winning should look like. That part matters, because every capital citizen who watches Finnick flirt on camera learns a lesson. Winning doesn't just mean you live. It means you gain access to bodies, to pleasure, to people turned into prizes. Snow turns Finnick into a promise. If you support the games, If you root for the right victor, you too might be invited into that world. But behind the cameras, the leash tightens. Snow doesn't hand Finnick a contract, he hands him a threat. The message is simple: do what we say, or the people you love suffer. Annie Cresta, Mags, anyone in District 4 who ever mattered to him. That's the functional schedule behind the fantasy. Handlers manage his time. Appointments with capital elites are arranged, not requested. His body is booked out as if he's another capital commodity. So why doesn't Finnick just refuse? Why not run or expose it from the start? Because Snow isn't only ruling through fear, he's ruling through desire and shame. Finnick's entire persona is built on being adored. If he speaks, he risks Annie's life, but he also risks the total collapse of the image that keeps him valuable. Who would the capital protect if their golden boy admits he's been trafficked on live TV? Here's the twist Snow doesn't anticipate. Those payments in secrets that capital clients hand over. Every affair, every poison, every illegal deal meant to bind Finnick closer to Snow's mercy instead arms him. With each whispered confession, Finnick becomes more dangerous. By the time we reach the rebellion, Snow's favorite weapon is carrying a second hidden blade. And when Finnick finally turns that blade outward, the leash snaps and the whole illusion of aspirational victory starts to unravel. Fear, addiction, poverty, spectacle. Snow's four horsemen. Snow doesn't just rule with roses and televised death. He rules with four horsemen: fear, addiction, poverty, spectacle. This is where we talk about the operating system behind every reward the capital hands out, including that perfect little victor's village, because at face value, it all looks generous. You win the games, you get a mansion, you get out of the reaping, your district gets food and parties. But here's the real question. Why do so many victors end up more broken after winning than before they were reaped? Start with fear, Snow's favorite. Public punishments in the square, threats to your siblings, your partner, your mentor. You watch Gale whipped in District 12, you hear about Johanna's family quietly erased, you see what happens to rebels in 8. The message is simple. Your body might have survived the arena, but everyone you love is still in it. A victor's crown just gives Snow more hostages. Then addiction, morphling, alcohol. Capital luxuries that feel like comfort and end up as chains. Haymitch is the clearest example. He drinks not because he's careless, but because the only way to sleep is to drown out the faces of the kids he sends to die. That part matters because the capital doesn't intervene. They stock his cabinets, they airbrush him into a joke on TV. A drunk mentor is safe. A sober, angry victor is a problem. Poverty is the quiet one. The districts stay desperate by design. Tesserae, starvation, unsafe work. Victor's village is placed on a hill or behind a fence so you can see the wealth but never touch it. Your relationship to the victor becomes aspirational. Maybe they'll sponsor your school, maybe they'll slip you bread. Hope is weaponized as scarcity management. And then spectacle, the games themselves. The interviews, the parades, the victory tours. You're not just a survivor, you're content. A broken victor is useful here. Famous enough to sell the games, damaged enough not to organize, and dependent enough on substances, on capital income, on Snow's goodwill, to be steered into whatever role the script demands. Haymitch is trapped in alcohol and trauma. Johanna in torture, isolation, and the loss of everyone she ever loved. Other victors disappear into Morphling and those eerie, empty Victor's Village streets. There is a lot to uncover here about how systematically that pattern repeats. Finnick is not exempt from any of this. He's pulled into the same machine. He gets the luxury, the attention, the status of being the capital's golden boy. But the price is sexual exploitation, constant performance, and the unspoken threat that Annie and Mags are always on the line. Snow hangs their safety over his head every time he steps on a train. So why doesn't it fully work? Why doesn't Finnick dissolve into Morphling, or vanish into his mansion, or turn his trauma inward the way so many others do? We're going to cover the exact moves he makes with those same tools: fear, addiction, poverty, spectacle, and how he flips them. Because the real danger to Snow isn't a victor he controls. It's a victor who learns how his tricks work and starts running his own game. The secret economy, how Finnick turned exploitation into intel. So here's the twist most people miss. Finnick isn't being paid at all. On paper, the capital elites are rewarding their favorite victor. In reality, they're buying state-sanctioned access to his body with something much cheaper than money. Secrets, affairs between power brokers, quiet bribes, rigged sponsorships, which head game maker hates which minister, and, eventually, the holy grail of capital gossip, how President Snow actually keeps his throne. At face value, that sounds safe for Snow, right? You hand a traumatized teenager the most incriminating information in the nation and assume he'll never use it. Why? Because the delivery system is the shame. For Finnick to repeat what he hears, he has to admit why he was in those rooms in the first place. He has to expose his own abuse, and in a world built on spectacle, that's social suicide and political suicide rolled into one. This is where we talk about Snow's favorite relationship to risk. He's fine with dangerous information floating around as long as it's wrapped in a threat. Talk, and we destroy you. Talk, and we hurt Annie. Talk, and we remind every district that their beloved victor was a capital toy. That part matters because it explains why Snow thinks this secret economy is a closed loop. The secrets are the chains. The chains are the gag. But Finnick does something Snow doesn't plan for. He pays attention. Instead of dissociating and letting the nights blur together, he memorizes names, dates, patterns. Who was in the room when a rival suddenly fell ill? Who started wearing roses right after a political shake-up? There is a lot to uncover here, and Finnick starts mentally filing it away the way Katniss counts arrows. It's survival, but it's also accounting. Who owes what? Who fears whom? Why certain people flinch when Snow smiles. And then we get to the poisons. Finnick hears, in half-drunk boasts and whispered horror stories, about Snow's preferred weapon. A sip of something at a party, a slow decline, a convenient vacancy in the cabinet. He learns why Snow's breath reeks of blood, why the roses are never just roses, why every public appearance is drowning in perfume. Here's the real question. Once you know the president is literally rotting from his own methods, how untouchable does he really look? By the time Plutarch Heavensby starts recruiting, Finnick's mind is already a database. We're going to cover how he chooses who to trust. But what matters in this moment is that he does trust. He feeds Plutarch, Beatty, the emerging rebellion. He turns his payments into leverage. He can confirm that Snow blackmails victors, traffics them, threatens their families. He can describe the roses that hide the blood. So when you reach Mockingjay and hear Finnick's broadcast, that's not a sudden confession. That's years of bookkeeping going public. And here's the part the Capitol never sees coming. By then, killing Finnick doesn't erase anything. His secrets are already out. His mind is already a loaded gun that's gone off. The real suspense is who he's quietly armed before Snow even realizes he's under fire. Pattern break. Was Finnick actually more dangerous than Katniss? So if Finnick's mind is already a gun that's gone off, we have to pause and ask a pretty uncomfortable question. Are we even looking at the right main character when we talk about Snow's biggest problem? At face value, the narrative trains you to see Katniss as the primary threat. She's the girl on fire, the spontaneous volunteer, the symbol every district child can point to and say, "That could be me." She hijacks the game's spectacle and turns it into open defiance. But here's the real question. Is a visible symbol actually harder to control than a beautiful broken victor who's been sleeping inside your inner circle for years? Because Finnick is there long before Katniss ever shoots an arrow at a force field. While District 12 is still half starving, he's already the Capitol's golden boy, draped in nets and sugar cubes, passed around among elites who think they own him. On paper, Snow has done everything right. He's taken the dangerous victor and turned him into a fantasy, a promise. You win, you get to be Finnick. But that part matters because the very mechanism Snow uses to control Finnick is what turns him into something far more dangerous than Katniss could ever be. Katniss is a spark, public, emotional, reactive. Her threat profile is about visibility. She embarrasses the Capitol on live television, forces rule changes, becomes the Mockingjay. You can track her, you can aim cameras, peacekeepers, and propaganda at her. Finnick is something else entirely. He's a spy wearing a swimsuit. Every favor he's forced into buys him information, names, affairs, poisonings, the real reasons people in the Capitol disappear. So if Snow could rewind the clock and erase one tribute from history, who terrifies him more? The girl who accidentally becomes a symbol, or the boy he deliberately turns into a weaponized secret collector who knows exactly how his roses stay so fresh? This is where we talk about pattern recognition. Snow understands how to handle symbols. He can co-opt them, dress them up, or kill them on camera. That's why he keeps trying to fold Katniss back into the game's narrative. The star-crossed lover, the grateful victor, the reluctant but controllable celebrity. But how do you neutralize someone whose power doesn't depend on being seen at all? Someone whose value is in what he remembers when the cameras are off. There is a lot to uncover here, because once you stop assuming Katniss is the only real threat, Finnick's whole arc reads differently. Suddenly, that charming smile in Catching Fire isn't just fan service, it's cover. That rope knot lesson on the beach isn't just flirting, it's relationship building with the one person Snow is already watching. And that leads to the next problem for the Capitol. Katniss is dangerous on her own, sure, but Finnick is plugged into something Katniss doesn't have at the start, a support network. Mags, Annie, Beetee, Johanna, even Plutarch. Why does that matter? Because once you give a secret collector a web of people to protect and be protected by, you've created a threat that no single execution can cleanly remove. So next, we're going to cover how those relationships turn Finnick from a controlled asset into the one Victor Snow can never fully bring to heel. Network Snow couldn't see. Annie, Mags, Beetee, Joanna. So if Finnick has this web around him, we have to ask, why didn't Snow just cut every strand? On paper, the Capitol already had the system. Victor's villages, private trains, capital handlers. You win the games, they move you into a mansion and then quietly build a cage around you. At face value, it looks generous. No more reaping, no more hunger. But here's the real question. What's the actual design principle behind that comfort? The pattern is simple. Isolate the victor from their district. Surround them with stylists, prep teams, escorts. Keep them busy mentoring, performing talents, filming propos for the Capitol. Every real relationship is either transactional or supervised. That part matters because isolation is cheaper than constant violence. If your only phone line goes straight to the Capitol, if your only peers are other broken victors across a train ride, Snow doesn't have to monitor your every word. He just has to make sure you never build the kind of trust that can turn into organized resistance. Now, this is where we talk about Finnick quietly refusing that script. He's the Capitol's golden boy, paraded through parties, sold off to elites. By all accounts, he should be the most controlled of them all. Instead, he insists on something incredibly dangerous in this system: enduring bonds. His love for Annie isn't a fling, it's obsessive, protective, grounded in shared trauma from District 4's games culture and her own breakdown. Mags is the second anchor point. She volunteers for Annie, then becomes a surrogate grandmother to Finnick. You see it in Catching Fire. He carries her through the jungle. He would rather die than leave her. That is not how Snow wants a mentor to think. A mentor is supposed to be a functionary. Finnick turns mentoring into family. Then the network expands. Beetee in 3, Johanna in 7, Plutarch in the Capitol control room. We're going to cover how those relationships play out tactically in the next section, but the important thing here is the pattern. Snow's playbook says, keep victors competing for Capitol favor. Finnick's reality is, they start trading secrets, sharing trauma, and coordinating under the surface. And notice something else. Finnick doesn't fully disappear into the usual victor spiral. Haymitch has alcohol. Johanna strips herself of anything Snow can use. Many victors vanish into addiction, self-destruction, or total apathy because there's no safe person to hold on to. Finnick absolutely breaks. He's traumatized, anxious, frayed. But he keeps moving for a reason. Annie has to live. That promise becomes his operating system. From a control theory perspective, this is lethal to Snow's strategy. A person whose only lifeline is their abuser is easy to own. A person with a community is noisy, unpredictable. You can't fully model them because their emotional inputs aren't coming from you. Snow can monitor a phone line. He can't monitor what Mags meant to Finnick. He can't quantify the way Beatty respects his mind, or how Johanna's rage mirrors his own. That invisible emotional economy gives Finnick resilience and a source of meaning that doesn't run through capital approval. So when the rebellion starts recruiting, is it any surprise Finnick is already halfway there? The network Snow couldn't see has been growing in the cracks of his own system. The next step is what happens when that hidden web plugs directly into a plan to burn the games down from the inside. Love as Snow's blind spot. So when that hidden web finally plugs into a plan to burn the games down from the inside, we hit Snow's real blind spot. Love. Snow tells Seneca that the games run on a balance of fear and hope. At face value, that sounds almost clinical, almost reasonable in his twisted logic. But here's the real question. What happens when someone's hope isn't the capital's promise of comfort, but a person the capital can never fully own? This is where we talk about Finnick and Annie. Snow's philosophy is simple. Love is leverage. You see it with Peter, with Johanna, with any victor who still has family in their district. If you care about someone, Snow turns that relationship into a weapon. He doesn't just threaten death, he threatens torture, madness, disappearance. That part matters because it shows you how he reads human emotion, not as a source of strength, but as a pressure point to press until you break. With Finnick, Snow runs the same playbook. Annie is the girl who went mad after her games, the one the capital frames as fragile, unstable, easy to dismiss. But to Finnick, she's the center of gravity. So Snow uses her as collateral. You want Annie safe in District 4, then you smile for the cameras. You become the capital's golden boy. You sleep with whoever we tell you to, and you keep your mouth shut about what those clients confess in the dark. We're going to cover the sex symbol angle more later, but the core is this. Annie is the unspoken threat behind every forced encounter, every televised flirtation. Snow assumes that the more Finnick loves her, the more controllable he becomes. And that's where he miscalculates. Because love doesn't make Finnick compliant. It makes him patient. It gives him a reason to endure humiliation without collapsing into the kind of broken, drunken spiral we see with other victors. Why doesn't Finnick overdose, or vanish into capital excess, or become a permanent puppet host? The reason is Annie survive this year, survive this client, survive this quarter quell, and maybe there's a future where she never has to be paraded again. Contrast him with victors who've lost everyone. Haymitch drinks himself numb. Johanna goes feral with rage once her family is executed. They're dangerous, but also erratic, easier for Snow to write off as damaged goods. Finnick is different. He has Annie. He had Mags, who volunteered to die for Annie. That tiny chain of care keeps him tethered to something outside capital narratives, outside Snow's script of what a victor is supposed to be. And here's the twist Snow never sees. That same love pushes Finnick toward the rebels. If the only way to give Annie a real life is to help destroy Snow, then suddenly every secret he's collected, every whispered confession, becomes ammunition. Hope stops being the Capitol's tool and becomes Finnick's. Snow can threaten Annie, he can imprison her, parade her, but he can't rewrite what she means to Finnick, or how far he'll go because of her. Love becomes the one thing Snow can't fully touch, and the one variable that turns his most polished victor into a ticking bomb. So when Finnick finally steps in front of a camera to tell Panem exactly what Snow has done, he isn't just spilling secrets. He's cashing in years of controlled love for one decisive strike. Broken, but not owned. Finnick versus Haymitch and Johanna. Finnick cashes in those secrets on camera, but to really feel how rare that is, you have to look at the victors Snow did manage to keep on a leash. This is where we talk about Haymitch and Johanna, two case studies in what happens when the games don't end. They just move into your bloodstream. Start with Haymitch. On paper, he's a success story. Lone victor from a poor district, upgraded to a mansion on the hill. At face value, Victor's village is his reward. But walk into that house in District 12 and you see the real contract. Bottles everywhere, rotting food, curtains half closed against a world he technically escaped, but can't actually leave. Snow doesn't need a peacekeeper in his living room when he's got addiction doing the work for him. Haymitch survives through cynicism and self-destruction. He mentors, but he also sabotages his own relationship with the kids he's trying to save, because caring is dangerous when the Capitol can kill anyone you love. Here's the real question. Why would Snow ever try to fix that? A victor who drinks himself numb, who believes nothing can change, is the perfect advertisement for despair. That part matters because it shows Snow's favorite tactic: turn the victor into their own prison. Johanna's path is louder, but it's built on the same blueprint. Her loved ones are killed because she wouldn't sell herself to the Capitol. That's not random cruelty. That's targeted policy. When we meet her, she's furious, abrasive, constantly testing boundaries. Then the quarter quell ends, and Snow takes what's left of her and runs it through the Capitol's torture machine. They shave her head. They flood her with water until the girl from the lumber district is afraid of a shower. They don't just hurt her body, they strip her of the identity she used to fight back. By Mockingjay, she's still rebellious, still spitting venom, but she's also shaking, unstable, trapped between wanting revenge and not being able to stand the training room. There is a lot to uncover here about how the games weaponize trauma long after the arena. Now put Finnick next to them. He's also exploited, also haunted, also turned into a product the Capitol can sell. But when you watch him in Victor's village or the training center, something's different. He flirts, he jokes, he ties knots, he comforts Peter, steadies Katniss, protects Mags and Annie. Where Haymitch folds inward and Johanna lashes outward, Finnick keeps reaching for people. Why doesn't he collapse the same way? One reason is armor. The Capitol flirt and the private loyalist are two different roles, and he knows exactly which one he's playing. The public Finnick is all sugar. Sugar cubes, sugar smiles, sugar promises. The private Finnick is strategic, observant, quietly collecting secrets from the same elites who think they own him. We're going to cover how dangerous that information becomes, but even here, you can see the pattern. He lets Snow script the performance while keeping the director's cut in his own head. Snow partially breaks him. Of course he does. The nightmares, the panic around Annie, the way Finnick shakes before the broadcast, all of that is real. But the core stays oriented toward love and eventually open rebellion. He never stops choosing people over the role he's been assigned. So the question is, when you have a victor who can play Snow's game and quietly rewrite the rules underneath, how long before that double life explodes on screen in a way the Capitol can't contain? The quarter quell, when Snow sends his own weapon back into the arena. So when does that double life finally detonate? It happens the moment Snow decides the only way to save his games is to throw his own golden boy back into the fire. The third quarter quell is supposed to be a reset button, victors only. No fresh tributes, no unknown variables. On paper, it's elegant. Punish the districts, erase symbols that won't behave, and remind everyone that even a victor is never really safe. At face value, you can see the logic. Katniss, Haymitch, Cedar, Beatty, Johanna, problem people, all in one arena. What could go wrong? Here's the real question. Why does Finnick look to Snow like the least dangerous piece on that board? From the Capitol's perspective, he's perfect. Adored by high society, a walking promise that the games can make you rich, beautiful, and worshipped. He smiles on cue. He mentors. He plays the charming victor who never complains. If you're Snow, that reads as loyalty, or at least as someone who understands the relationship. You perform, we let you live. That part matters because it shows you how shallow Snow's reading of people really is. He believes fear and comfort are the only levers that count. Finnick has both status and trauma, so in Snow's mind he's contained. The Capitol thinks it owns him twice over, through the arena and through the bed. What Snow misses is the cost of paying him in secrets instead of money. Every gift Finnick receives is actually a confession. Affairs, poisonings, blackmail. He doesn't just know the Capitol's vices, he knows its operating system. So when Finnick steps onto the 75th Arena platform, Snow believes he's testing a loyal asset. In reality, he's just deployed a rebel operative behind enemy lines. We're going to cover the broadcast later, but you can already feel the setup here. Plutarch has defected in everything but title, Haymitch is quietly coordinating, and Finnick has been looped in. His job in this specific games isn't to win, it's to extract. Watch how fast he moves toward that goal. Within minutes, he's saving Peter from drowning, trading his own safety for the boy Snow most wants dead. Why risk that unless you've already chosen a side? Then there's the rope, the sugar cubes, the way he slots seamlessly into Beatty's wire the force field plan. This is where we talk about integration. Finnick doesn't argue, he doesn't hesitate, he just acts as if the rebel strategy is the only real script, and the games are background noise. And those cryptic comments, "He saved my life," "the boy with the bread." On the surface, it's sentimental. Underneath, it's a mission statement. He's signaling to Katniss that he's been briefed on her history, that her relationship with Peter is the axis of the rebellion's hope, and that his loyalty runs through that bond, not through Snow. There is a lot to uncover here, but the core is simple. The call to quell is the moment Snow unknowingly sends his own carefully crafted weapon back into the arena, and the weapon has flipped. By the time the force field explodes and the hovercraft appears, the games have inverted. The arena isn't a tool of control anymore. It's an extraction zone Snow paid for and staffed himself. So where do you go from a president who just sabotaged his own spectacle? You look at what happens when Finnick finally turns those collected secrets outward, and how one victor's truth-telling does more damage than any arena mutt ever could. Why even allow victors like Finnick to exist? So if one victor's truth-telling can gut the games from the inside, why did Snow ever let someone like that exist in the first place? Here's the real question. If you're a dictator obsessed with control, why create celebrities who are rich, adored, and networked enough to hurt you? Why hand somebody a crown, a microphone, and a direct line into the capital's most powerful bedrooms, then act surprised when they become a problem? On paper, there's a much simpler solution. You win the games, you die on the train home. Or maybe you don't die, but you disappear. Permanent isolation, no victor's village, no parades, no mentoring, no status. Just a quiet facility somewhere in the capital where the cameras never go and the heroes of Panem are slowly erased. Total fear. Zero upside. At face value, that sounds way more Snow-coded, right? So why doesn't he do that? Because the games aren't just punishment. They're a product. They have to sell. To districts, to capital audiences, to terrified parents who still have to send their children to the reaping every year. The reason is brutally simple. Pure terror burns out. You can't run a system forever on you will suffer and then you will die. You need a promise. You need the whisper that if your child is strong enough, charming enough, lucky enough, there is a door out. This is where we talk about the relationship between fear and hope. Snow understands that the most efficient kind of control is when people police themselves because they're chasing a reward they'll almost never get. Victor's Village, the sponsorships, the fame, those are all part of the same sales pitch. Play along with the games and maybe your district gets food. Maybe your kid becomes a victor and never works again. That part matters because it turns the arena from a death sentence into a lottery. Horrifying odds, but still a chance. And Finnick is the jackpot commercial. He's beautiful, he's young, he's draped in sea green silk and sugar cubes, and every camera in the capital loves him. He strolls through the training center with ropes of gold, tells outrageous stories, and makes it look effortless. To a kid in District 4, he's not just a victor, he's proof the games can make you a god. Parents see him and think, if someone has to go, maybe they could end up like Finnick. That's the psychological trick. His existence convinces millions that winning is worth the horror, that the system occasionally rewards obedience. But there is a lot to uncover here, because the very thing that sells the dream is what makes Snow vulnerable. A powerful, semi-autonomous victor is never just a puppet. Even with leashes, blackmail, addiction, forced prostitution, Snow is betting that hope can be weaponized without ever slipping out of his hands. Finnick proves that's wrong. Once you grant real status, real connections, and real knowledge, you're not just manufacturing a symbol anymore. You're arming a person. And the moment that person decides the promise was a lie, all that carefully cultivated fame turns around and starts speaking for the other side. So where does that leave a president who built his empire on a little hope? It leaves him facing the one outcome his games were never designed to handle. A victor who stops selling the dream and starts cashing in the secrets. And Finnick is only the beginning of that problem. Fear. Finnick as the cost of Snow's favourite equation. Because here's the problem Snow never solves. His entire system runs on a math equation he can't actually control. Hope versus fear. We're going to cover why Finnick is the moment that equation breaks. You remember Snow's conversation with Seneca Crane. Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. Too much hope is dangerous. Too little and people rebel. So the games become this annual calibration device. A ritual where the capital measures out terror and then sprinkles in just enough promise to keep the districts chasing a miracle instead of tearing the system down. At face value, the victors are the proof that the ratio works. Any victor walking through their district is a moving equation. On one side, you see the mansion, the food, the parties, the direct line to the capital. On the other, you see what it took to get there. Dead children, televised trauma, a life sentence of mentoring kids who will probably die. That part matters because Snow needs you to believe two things at once: that survival and luxury are possible, and that the only path to them runs through his arena. Here's the real question. What happens when one of those symbols starts talking back? This is where we talk about Finnick as the cost of Snow's favourite strategy. By turning him into the golden boy of the capital, Snow overinvests in a single piece of propaganda. Finnick gets maximum visibility, maximum access, maximum proximity to the capital's elite. He's paraded as proof that the games can make you adored, that the relationship between district and capital can be glamorous if you just play along. But every party invite is also an information channel. Every gift is paid for in secrets. Snow understands mass executions. You kill someone, you hang their body in the square, you make fear do the talking. It's blunt, it's simple, it's quiet afterward. The games are the opposite. They're fear wrapped in spectacle. Executions silence enemies. The games create symbols. And symbols are noisy. They give interviews, they mentor, they fall in love, they go back into the arena with decades worth of observations stored up. Finnick is what happens when a symbol realizes he's not just decoration, he's holding the receipts. By the time we reach Mockingjay, Snow's equation flips on him. Finnick's broadcast isn't just a list of crimes. It's a live demonstration that Snow can be exposed, that his poisons, his blackmail, his trafficking of victors were never as invisible as he thought. The fear those revelations create doesn't reinforce Snow's power. It redirects it. People don't just fear what Snow can do to them, they start to believe what they can do to Snow. So when Finnick looks into the camera and starts naming names, hope quietly changes sides. The games still exist, the roses still bloom, but the ratio is broken. And once one victor proves the illusion can be punctured, you have to ask, how many other rewards are just waiting to turn into weapons. The capital's golden boy becomes its whistleblower. So when Finnick looks into that camera, we're not just watching a rebel transmission, we're watching the capital's favorite toy turn into its whistleblower. The setup is almost boring on purpose. No arena, no mutts, just Finnick O'Dare in a studio, voice steady, hands still, as he starts listing the real rules of Snow's games. He talks about the poison first, how Snow uses it on political rivals, how he drinks from the same cup, then takes the antidote and spends the rest of his life covering the damage with those infamous white roses. At face value, that's already chilling. Your president smells good because he's rotting underneath. But then Finnick goes further. This is where we talk about the trafficking, about how victors are sold to capital elites, how refusal isn't an option, how the price isn't just money, it's secrets, names, affairs, corruption. Finnick calmly turns what the capital framed as his charm into a paper trail of abuse. Snow wanted a sex symbol, he accidentally created an intelligence network. Here's the real question. Why does this hit harder than any fiery speech Katniss could give? The reason is that Finnick isn't some angry stranger from a distant district. He's the capital's golden boy. They watched him win at 14. They cheered for his sugar cube flirting. They hung his poster on their walls. So when he says on camera that Snow trafficked him and other victors, that relationship between audience and idol snaps. It's not a rebel rumor anymore. It's testimony. And he doesn't keep it vague. He names names. He describes patterns. The same elites who toasted victors at parties are suddenly implicated in a system that turns rewards into lifelong sentences. That part matters because it flips the emotional script. For years, victors carried private shame, each one thinking they were uniquely broken. In one broadcast, Finnick reframes that shame as evidence of a crime scene that stretches from the capital's mansions to every district. From a control theory angle, Snow's whole strategy depends on mystique and denial. He must always be terrifying, but never officially guilty. People can suspect, but they can't prove. Finnick ruins that. Once the entire nation hears how Snow poisons enemies, perfumes the stench, and sells victors' bodies to maintain loyalty, fear curdles into disgust. And disgust is dangerous. You can be scared of a tyrant and still obey, but can you respect one after you've heard the details? Snow's usual move is simple. Silence the problem, then pretend it never existed. Kill the victor, censor the footage, flood the airwaves with new spectacle. But Finnick's Mockingjay message is pre-recorded, duplicated, and blasted across Panem. Even if Finnick dies, and we know he will, the words are already loose in the system. You can't unhear a confession. So the promise of the games changes again. If even the capital's brightest star turns on Snow, what else might be rotting behind the roses? And when the cameras swing back to Katniss after Finnick's broadcast, you have to wonder, what happens when the face of the rebellion steps into a world where everyone finally knows the rules? Book versus movie Finnick. How adaptation softens the threat, and here's where adaptation quietly rewrites the threat level. If you've only seen the films, you know Finnick is charming, tragic, heroic. But here's the real question: Do you ever fully feel how weaponized he is against Snow? In the books, Suzanne Collins does not blink. Finnick's sexual exploitation is named, detailed, and tied directly to an economy of secrets. Capital elites don't just pay him in jewels, they pay him in information that can topple careers. That part matters because it turns every forced encounter into espionage. On screen, that whole system is mostly smoke. You get hints, a few loaded lines, a haunted look. But the word prostitution never lands. The mechanics of who buys him, what they pay with, and why Snow allows it stay blurred. At face value, that softens the relationship between Finnick and the Capital, from active blackmail to vague trauma. You know something awful happened. You don't necessarily know he's been running an intelligence operation from the heart of the game's fan base. So what does that do to your perception? Without the full weight of his abuse and intel gathering, film-only viewers are nudged to see him as comic relief and eye candy first, strategic threat second. The sugar cube scene is the clearest example. In Catching Fire, the movie, it plays almost flirty and fun, a confidence game to rattle Katniss. In the book, that same scene sits on top of everything you've already learned about his exploitation. The way he toys with her, the way he performs desirability on command, reads as a practiced survival skill, not just a capital playboy bit. Then you hit the beach with Annie's locket. In the film, it's a beautiful, sad moment. The hot Victor has a real love. He's not just a capital toy. The camera lingers on the promise of reunion, on the hope of two damaged people finding peace. In the book, there is a lot to uncover here. That locket is also evidence of Snow's long-term leverage over Finnick and Finnick's decision to risk everything anyway. You feel the years of coercion, the trades, the secrets he's banked. This is where we talk about a man who has already been unraveling Snow's empire in whispers before Katniss ever volunteered. The Mockingjay broadcast is the biggest divergence. The movie gives you a tight emotional monologue about poison and roses, a neat expose that fits into a single propo. It's powerful but contained. On the page, Finnick's testimony is sprawling, specific, almost bureaucratic in its horror. He names the system, how victors are trafficked, how Snow records everything, how the games never end. You can feel districts recalculating their entire understanding of victory in real time. And that's what the films mostly lose. The sense that Finnick has been a long game, not a late recruit, but an early crack in the facade of control. When you restore the book details, you see why Snow could never truly own him. The Capital might have his body, his image, his address in Victor's village, but his secrets, those were always moving in the other direction. So when we step into the next part of this story and talk about how victors are supposed to be Snow's trophies, keep Finnick in mind. What happens to a system built on ownership when one of the prizes is already quietly picking the locks? Day-to-day life as Snow's favorite victor, so what does picking the locks actually look like when you're Finnick O'Dare? You don't see the rebellion first, you see the schedule, the routine, the way the Capital turns your entire day into a performance. At face value, it looks glamorous. Morning starts in some Capital penthouse or a spotless Victor's village bedroom in District 4. But either way, you wake up already on display. There's a prep team on call, stylists rotating through, a handler reading off your appointments as if you're a peacekeeper unit, not a person. Training session, live interview, Snow's party, 2 private engagements with unnamed elites. Here's the real question. Where in that list are you allowed to say no? We're going to cover the surface first because that part matters, because it's what the capital wants everyone to see. Finnick at the training centre, sparring for cameras, selling the story that victors stay sharp for the games. Finnick on talk shows, tossing sugar cubes, flirting with hosts, reinforcing the promise that if you win, you get to become a celebrity instead of a corpse. Then the parties, endless rooms of champagne, music, and capital citizens who treat him as both trophy and consumable. But under that, the appointments, the ones Suzanne Collins confirms are paid in secrets, not money. You're escorted through private elevators, past guards who never meet your eyes, into suites that smell of roses and expensive fear. Every door might hide someone tied directly to Snow. Every refusal might mean Annie's name ends up on a transport, or Mags mysteriously loses access to medical care. So you perform, constantly, because the alternative isn't just your death, it's theirs. There is a lot to uncover here about the psychological toll. Imagine never knowing which client is testing you for Snow, which offhand comment is bait, which touch is being watched on a hidden camera. You survive the arena by reading micro movements, and now that same survival instinct is turned inward, burning you out. Sleep is shallow. Food is a prop. Your real job is to anticipate danger in every smile. And yet, this is where we talk about resistance. Finnick's mind is still that of a victor in the arena, scanning for patterns. Pillow talk becomes intel gathering. A drunk official brags about a shipment of mutts. A nervous aide mentions new security protocols around District 13 rumors. A jealous lover complains about Snow's little poison habit. Finnick files it all away, mapping relationships, cross-checking names, slowly building the network we see pay off in Mockingjay. Then, occasionally, the train goes home. District 4 isn't peace, but it's the closest thing he has. In Victor's village, he can drop the capital accent, let his shoulders fall, sit at Mag's table, and not be beautiful, just tired. He can walk Annie along the docks at dawn, when the only witnesses are gulls and waves, and finally say the things he can't risk in the capital, what he's heard, what he fears, why he still believes there's a sliver of hope. Those pockets of authenticity are tiny, but they're the reason Snow never truly owns him. Every day is a tightrope. Appear compliant enough to protect his people, stay alert enough to keep collecting secrets, cling hard enough to Annie and Mags that he remembers who he is under the costume. The effort it takes just to remain unowned is staggering. And this daily grind sets up the next step in Snow's plan. Because if constant performance doesn't break a victor, what do you do next? You change the rules of the games themselves. Finnick's final arena, the tunnels under the capital. So when the rules change again, it's not on a glittering stage. It's in the dark. The capital turns a propaganda squad into a real combat unit and drops them into the tunnels, and you can feel the game's logic snap back into place. Hidden pods, invisible triggers, mutts waiting where cameras can't see, but microphones definitely can. At face value, this is just urban warfare. But here's the real question. Why do those tunnels feel more like an arena than a battlefield? Snow doesn't need a cornucopia anymore. He has sewer grates and maintenance doors. Every turn the squad takes is another bet that the next 10 feet won't explode, flood, or dissolve you in black oil. We're going to cover the mutts in a second, but that part matters because it shows Snow's favorite relationship to death. Theatrical, intimate, and technically deniable. If Katniss dies down here, it's not an execution, it's just a tragic casualty of war. And in the middle of that engineered nightmare, Finnick is still doing what he's always done. Survive and shield. He moves fast, climbs, doubles back, hauls people out of water. He's the one who can read the rhythm of danger, the way he once read sponsor gifts and capital moods. When Katniss freezes, he pulls her forward. When the squad fractures, he keeps the promise of the mission intact. Get the Mockingjay through the maze. This is where we talk about Finnick as more than a pretty face with a trident. Underground, stripped of cameras and costumes, he's physically lethal and emotionally steady. He's joking with Annie in his memory, holding on to that thin thread of hope. But on the surface, he's pure focus. He's the rare victor who has learned to carry his own trauma and still make space for everyone else's. Then the mutts hit. They come out of the water in that narrow tunnel, pale and wrong, with human teeth and capital precision. It's a callback to the wolf mutts in the first games, but escalated. The faces are less familiar now, the cruelty more efficient. There is a lot to uncover here, because the attack has that same sick rhythm as a game's finale. Chaos, a fall, a desperate grab. Finnick is pulled from the ladder, dragged into the swarm. Katniss and the others try to reach him, and for a second you think they might. Then comes the stun of reality. There isn't time. There isn't space. There is only Gale's hand on her arm and the hollow clink of the hollow as she blows the tunnel, and Finnick apart. From Snow's perspective, this should be a win. A dangerous victor, erased in a blur of teeth and rubble. No execution order, no martyr's footage. Just another body in the dark. Isn't that exactly what the games were always promising the districts? But here's the twist Snow can't control. By the time Finnick dies, his propo has already aired. His secrets, the poison, the roses, the trafficking of victors are out. You can't unring that bell. Killing Finnick doesn't restore fear. It confirms everything he said. The capital's golden boy disappears, and instead of silence, the echo is his voice. So the tunnels do their job, but not Snow's. He removes the man and loses the narrative. And that failure sets up the next escalation when Snow stops relying on mutts and pods and turns the entire capital itself into his final arena. Control after death. Why Snow still loses. Snow thinks the tunnels fix everything. They don't. Because this is where we talk about control after death. Authoritarian regimes usually have a very simple playbook for threats. First option, erase you. Your name disappears from the record, your image from the broadcasts. Your district is told you never existed. Second option, discredit you. You're crazy, you're a liar, you're a traitor who just wants attention. And if that doesn't work, they kill you before you can speak. End the story at the exact frame that serves the regime. Snow has done all three. He vanishes dissenters, he turns Haymitch into a joke, he has Cinna beaten to death off camera. The pattern is clear. If a victor can't be controlled, their memory will be. But here's the real question. Why doesn't that work on Finnick? At face value, Finnick should be easy to erase. He's a sex symbol the Capitol manufactured. You'd think they could just pull the posters, stop airing the clips, and move on to the next pretty tribute. Instead, his story outlives him in ways Snow can't predict. Finnick's taped testimony about Snow's poison, blackmail, and the trafficking of victors is already out there, circulating through every district, before the mutts ever reach him. You can't unbroadcast a secret. So when Finnick dies, his relationships do something Snow never intended. They become distribution networks for meaning. Annie isn't just a grieving widow, she is living proof that Finnick's love was real, not a Capitol performance. Katniss carries his memory into every room where the new Panem is negotiated. Beatty and Plutarch remember exactly which elites paid in secrets. And that part matters because it ties Finnick's private suffering to public accountability. Authoritarian power depends on turning each death into a warning. Rue is supposed to be a lesson. Stay small, stay scared. Prim's death is supposed to prove that no one is safe if they challenge the Capitol. But what actually happens? Each loss becomes an emotional charge against Snow. Rue's song turns into a rebellion signal. Prim's name becomes shorthand for everything the game's destroyed. Finnick joins that pattern, not as a cautionary tale about disobedience, but as evidence that even the Capitol's golden victor chose the rebellion. His death doesn't say obey, it says he knew the truth and still fought. There is a lot to uncover here, because true control for Snow would mean dictating not just who lives and dies, but what their lives and deaths mean. He can engineer Finnick's present suffering, the games, the coerced affairs, the constant surveillance. What he can't script is the ultimate narrative Panem tells about Finnick Odair once he's gone. Finnick's uncontrollability is temporal. In the moment, Snow can hurt him. In history, Snow loses him. And that's the problem for any regime built on fear. Time keeps voting against it. We're going to cover how Snow tries one last time to seize that narrative by turning the Capitol itself into an arena where even memory can be weaponized. But notice the shift. If killing Finnick didn't restore control, what will Snow risk next? So let's flip the arena for a second. What if the one risk Snow took with Finnick, the exploitation, the secrets for sex economy, never happened? What if Finnick Odair was exactly what the Capitol pretended he was at face value? A pampered victor, adored, wealthy, and strategically ignorant. Here's the real question. Does Snow actually win more control in that version of Panem? Or does he quietly lose one of the main pressure points that cracks his regime? In this alternate timeline, Finnick still wins the games at 14. He still gets the mansion, the fame, the endless parade of Capitol parties, but there is no backroom offer from Snow. No elites paying in whispered confessions instead of money. No slow education in how often Snow reaches for poison when he feels cornered. Finnick becomes a symbol, not a spy. That part matters, because the canon Finnick builds an invisible network. Every affair is a trade. Every client is a file in his mental catalogue of capital crimes, rigged accidents, debts, and crucially, Snow's pattern of poisoning allies and enemies. When he sits in front of that camera in Mockingjay and calmly lists the abuses, the sex trafficking of victors, the blackmail, the roses that cover the scent of blood, he's cashing in a decade of forced intimacy. Take that away, and what changes? For one, there is no devastating broadcast where a beloved capital darling turns on Snow in front of the whole country. The districts already know the regime is cruel. The people who need to hear Finnick are the capital citizens clinging to the promise that their president is ruthless, but rational, brutal, but necessary. Without Finnick's testimony, it's much easier for them to stay in denial. So does Finnick still rebel? I think yes. You still have a decent boy from District 4, still traumatized by the games, still in love with Annie Crester, still watching Snow use her as leverage. The relationship between them and their district doesn't vanish just because the capital stops short of sexual exploitation. He would resent mentoring. He would see other tributes die. He would feel the games never truly end. But without insider intel, his rebellion stays smaller, more emotional, less strategic. Maybe he joins the Quarter Quell plot. Maybe he still volunteers to protect Annie. Yet his role becomes muscle and morale, not whistleblower. He's a spear, not a spotlight. And Snow's stability, ironically, stronger. The rebellion still has Katniss, Beatty, Plutarch. But they lose the clean, almost legal brief Finnick delivers on camera. No detailed explanation of Snow's poisons, no public naming of the capital's sex crimes. It becomes easier for Snow to paint the rebels as terrorists and the Mockingjay as a hysterical girl from a coal district. This is where we talk about unintended consequences. The exploitation Snow uses to break Finnick is the same mechanism that arms him with the information to help break Snow. Remove the abuse, and you remove the receipts. So when Snow turns the capital into an arena in those final days, ask yourself, without Finnick's broadcast softening the ground, would anyone in that city believe what they're about to see? Finnick versus the system why he's the one tribute Snow never controlled. So when Snow turns the capital into an arena, Finnick has already done something more dangerous than throwing a bomb. He's pulled back the curtain on how the arena was built in the first place. This is where we talk about the system he's up against. Snow's toolkit is brutally consistent. Fear through public executions and the games, addiction through morphling and capital excess, poverty in the districts, spectacle on every screen, and sexual exploitation behind closed doors. On top of that, he threads in Victor's Village, parties and sponsorships as a controlled drip of hope. Win and you get food, a mansion, a direct line to the capital. At face value, it looks generous. In practice, it's a leash. Finnick's entire life is proof of how that leash is supposed to work. He's the perfect narrative, 12-year-old Victor, capital heartthrob, always smiling, always shirtless, always available. He mentors, he performs, he dates whoever Snow's elites choose. Then, quietly, he becomes a collector of secrets, a lover who refuses to give up Annie, a rebel operative, a whistleblower who names names on air, and finally a martyr in the tunnels beneath the Capitol. The arc is not from victim to free man, it's from weapon to counter-weapon. So why does he stand apart from the other victors caught in the same machine? Here's the real question. If Snow's whole strategy is to define you by what he's done to you, what happens when you refuse that definition? Finnick plays the role Snow writes for him, but he treats it as a costume, not a self. The Capitol thinks it's buying his body. He's actually buying information. They try to bury him in shame. He turns that shame into testimony. They threaten Annie to turn love into a weakness. He turns love into the one reason he will never cooperate again. That part matters because it gets to the core claim. Snow can damage Finnick. He can sell him, isolate him, addict the people around him, and finally send him into a pod-riddled sewer to die. But he never owns him. By the time Finnick falls, the broadcast is already out. The districts have heard about poisoned rivals and trafficked victors. Capital citizens have heard it too. The usual solution, silence the problem, doesn't work when the problem is now public record. And this loops us back to the opening promise of the video. The one tribute Snow never controlled isn't the loudest rebel or the most obvious symbol with a bird on her pin. It's the golden boy who learned to tie knots and then spent a decade quietly unspooling an empire. We're going to cover how that legacy lingers in the next section, but hold that image. A system built on fear, undone by the one victor who understood its secrets better than Snow did. What Finnick's story says about real-world power. So what do you do with a story about a man turned into a product? Because Finnick isn't just a tragic backstory, he's a case study in how power actually works. And once you see the pattern in Panem, it starts to look uncomfortably familiar. At face value, Snow's control over Finnick is extreme science fiction evil, poisoned rivals, sex trafficking, a whole capital built on spectacle. But here's the real question. What are those tactics when you strip away the sci-fi gloss? Shame, isolation, exploitation, the illusion of choice. That part matters because those are the same tools you see in authoritarian regimes, abusive workplaces, and even toxic relationships. You're told you're special, that you're being chosen, while the system quietly narrows your options down to obedience or destruction. Snow parades Finnick as the perfect victor, adored, wealthy, desired. But the promise behind that glamour is a trap. You can have everything as long as you let the Capitol define what everything means. That's the relationship abusive systems always try to build. They make you complicit in your own performance, so you'll be too ashamed to ever speak. And when you look around our world, how often do we see industries built on beautiful surfaces? Fashion, entertainment, even politics, where the shine exists to hide who's being hurt off camera. This is where we talk about whistleblowers and survivors. Finnick weaponizes the one currency Snow can't fully control: information. Every forced encounter becomes a secret stored away. Years later, his taped broadcast in Mockingjay functions exactly the way real-world testimony does when it lands at scale. He names the abuse. He names the abuser. He explains the mechanism, poison, blackmail, sexual coercion, and suddenly the Capitol's terror isn't a mysterious fog anymore. It's a documented system. There is a lot to uncover here, because once people understand how the games are rigged, fear starts to crack. And notice he doesn't do it alone. Authoritarian power always tries to cut you off from your district, from your family, from anyone who might remind you who you were before the games. Finnick survives because he builds a network anyway. Mags, Annie, Beatty, Johanna, even Katniss. Love, friendship, shared trauma circles in the training center corridors. These become counter-programming to Snow's narrative that victors are property. People are hardest to control when they can compare notes, share information, and refuse to let an abuser write the only version of their story. So where does that leave us? Finnick's arc is an invitation to scan your own world for capital logic. Where is glamour covering harm? Whose testimony are we treating as inconvenient background noise instead of a warning flare? And when someone risks everything to tell us how the game is really played, do we believe them? Or do we side with the pretty surface because it's easier? We're going to cover how Finnick's legacy keeps echoing through Panem in the next part, but hold on to this thread as we move forward. Every system built on silence is one honest story away from collapse. The question is whether we're willing to hear it. Your turn in the arena. Join the conversation. So, as we step back from all the secrets, the roses and the poison, we end up with something pretty simple. Finnick Odair is the one tribute Snow never truly controlled. At face value, Snow did everything right with him. He took a beautiful, talented victor from a poorer district, turned him into a capital fantasy, and wired his entire life into the games' machine. But here's the real question. What happens when the tools you design to break someone end up giving them everything they need to break you instead? That part matters because every control Snow used on Finnick backfired. The sexual exploitation that was meant to humiliate him, it paid him in secrets. The constant visibility that was supposed to trap him in a persona, it gave him an audience ready to hear him when he finally spoke. The promise of safety for Annie and Mags, it anchored his resistance instead of his obedience. So where do you see Finnick at his most dangerous to Snow? Is it the quarter quell, when he walks back into the arena already playing a different game? Is it the Mockingjay broadcast, when he turns years of whispered confessions into a public indictment of Snow's entire relationship to power? Or is it something earlier, some small gesture, some choice of who he protects, that proves he was never fully owned? I'm really curious where you land on this. Do you actually think Finnick was more dangerous to Snow than Katniss? She becomes the symbol, the Mockingjay, the face of open rebellion. But Finnick is the one who can say calmly on camera that the president poisons his enemies and sells victors' bodies to capital elites. Which threat cuts deeper? The girl on fire, or the golden boy who quietly knows where all the bodies are buried? This is where we talk about the quieter spaces too. How do you imagine Finnick's daily life in the capital before the rebellion? The parties, the appointments, the way he has to perform charm while cataloguing every rumor about Snow's poisons and every powerful name on his client list. There is a lot to uncover here in his relationships with other victors as well. Mags as his moral compass, Johanna as his mirror in rage, Beatty as his partner in strategy, Annie as the one person who sees him without the mask. And then there's the movies. Did the film version of Finnick change how dangerous you thought he was? Did they lean too hard into the flirtation, or did that make it even more chilling when you realize what that flirtation is covering? If you've enjoyed going this deep into Panem's politics and the way Snow builds and loses control over his victors, you can help this kind of breakdown reach more people by hitting the thumbs up, subscribing to the channel, and checking out the other videos we've done on different victors and Snow's systems of control. We're going to cover more of those invisible battles in upcoming episodes. So I'll leave you with this. In a world built on control, the most dangerous tribute isn't always the one with the bow. It's the one who knows the rules so well, he can teach the rest of us how the game was rigged. And the real question is, once you've heard that, can you ever watch the games the same way again?